TomTalks! Ooh, zippity doo-dah, I'm on time again, and we're back for another one. Hello all, and welcome to the 14th instalment of TomTalks, the programme where we talk about everything to do with Blue Bastard. Let's have a look at tonight's topic. Take it away, Sheffield! Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends is most famous for being a show filmed entirely on a model railway, with real working model trains and impeccably crafted scenery all created by hand. The trains themselves have been through various different modelling styles over the years. Before they were entirely constructed from brass throughout the 2000s, they were made of lots of things, mainly plastic and or brass body shells with components like chassis, buffers and other details sourced from various railway modelling companies, and I thought it'd be fun to delve into these companies that Thomas sourced its various model making necessities from. So today, we'll be looking at the various model manufacturers and toy companies that have provided components used to make the locomotives and rolling stock for the model series of Thomas. How many model makers helped out with this little show's production? Let's find out! Our story begins at the very dawn of Thomas on TV, in 1953. I think you all know what I'm referring to here. Yes, that. And the manufacturer that provided engines for this ill-fated programme was none other than Hornby Dublo, which was owned by Meccano Limited at this time. Douglas Mayer, the appointed director of the show, got in touch with Meccano, and their Hornby Dublo division got to work providing a layout for the show and the necessary engines. The engines that were used to represent Audrey's famous colourful cast were three EDL2 Duchess of Atholl 00 scale models, specifically for Edward, Henry and James, the latter of whom is the only character we have a picture of as of 2025, and for Thomas, he would be represented by Dublo's 2217 N2 tank engine model. Very little modification was done to these models initially, and the BBC gave Wilbert a half-arsed reason for not making them look like the characters in the books, claiming they were similar, if not identical. However, this was basically what Wilbert and his publisher Edmund Ward thought of this claim. Bollocks! So Ward decided to have the models modified to look more like the characters from the stories, with help from one Peter R. Wickham, who previously in 1953 had built 7mm scale models of the characters for that year's March edition of Model Maker magazine as a commission by Ward. Back on Hornby Dublo, as of yet we don't have any exact confirmation on what coaches were used for this pilot, but if I had to take a wild guess as to which ones were used, I'd say they would have likely been something along the lines of Hornby Dublo's standard D12 coaches. That's pretty much all I could gather for the models used in this mysterious 1953 pilot. Now let's move into more familiar territory. Jumping a good 30 years later to 1983, the crew had decided that the default scale the show would be made in would be Gauge 1, after a presumably unsuccessful attempt with an anonymous O-gauge model. The engines were all custom-machined body shells made from various plastics, not just Perspex like everybody seems to believe, with their chassis and other miscellaneous components sourced from another company, which we'll see later. For the rolling stock, they would be simple kit builds, sourced from the Suffolk-based model company Tenmille Products, a company that mostly specialises in garden railway equipment. Almost all of Tenmille's rolling stock kits that they produced throughout the 1980s were used in the show. We'll start with the coaches. For the main express coaches, the kits used for them were Tenmille's G107 and G108 Mansell coaches, and for the suburban coaches, Annie, Clarabelle and Henrietta, the kits used for them would be the G104 and G105 Stroudley four-wheel coaches. Henrietta specifically would receive extensive modifications, of course, one of those being these AG105 torpedo ventilators on her roof. Later on in Series 5, the special coaches would be introduced, and the kits used to make them would be Tenmille's G176 Stanier period coach for the composite, and the G154 Collet period coach for the brake. As for the trucks, this is where we'll see the most of Tenmille's usage. To represent the goods wagons in this show, the crew would use numerous G1017 7-plank trucks, the G126 tankers, the G020 freelance short wheelbase truck, the G022 Linton and Barnstable 4-wheel truck of all things, alongside the G023 L&B box vans, and a few G024 L&B bogie trucks. For the vans specifically, The crew would utilise the G103SR utility vans, with some of these being modified with Tenmille's AG115 Mansell coach bogies, the G109 LMS vent vans, the G110 GWR vent vans, the G111 LNER vent vans, the G121 LB and SCR vent vans, and the G127 Sachs assault vans. And for the brake vans, the show would use a variety of vans, including the G118 SR 25-ton pillbox van, the G119 20-ton LNER van, and the G130 GWR Toad van, to represent Toad himself. It wasn't just Tenmille's rolling stock that was used in the show, as they also provided various engine components too. For instance, for some characters like Mavis, Oliver, the Class 40, Ari and Bert, their buffers were Tenmille's standard AG102 buffer sets. And for Boko, Mavis, Oliver, Ari and Bert, their coupling frames and hooks would be sourced from Tenmille's AG103 coupling sets. In Series 1, before it was changed completely, Thomas's brake pipe was also a Tenmille product, specifically the AG118 vacuum pipe set. And we'll finish the Tenmille product list with a product that might have seeped its way into the show, in the form of this crossing sign in the episode Mavis. I don't know if this Beware of Trains sign is a Tenmille product, or if it was just created from scratch, but if it was Tenmille, then it would have been from their AG182 etched brass signage set. Now, as good as Tenmille's products were, there was indeed a drawback to them. Over time, these kits would become more brittle and fragile to a point where they couldn't be used anymore. I'm specifically referring to Annie and Clarabelle here, who both ended up going through 2 lots of the kits used to make them, one time for the first 2 series, and the other time for the 90s series. The big tell, of course, is Annie's buffer beam being raised between series 2 and 3. The 90s kits in particular became so worn out that newer resin models had to be made during series 5, as the older 10mm models just could not keep going, especially with a certain silver screen escapade afoot. You lot bored of 10mm yet? Good, me too. We've covered everything 10mm related now, let's move on. And now it's time to cover the model manufacturer that all of us will probably be most familiar with. As I said earlier, the engine's body shells would be custom machined from various plastics. As for their chassis and various other components, they would be sourced from a certain German toy manufacturing company known as Märklin Modelbahnen, going strong in the toy industry since 1859. Märklin are well known for their German outline locomotives, ranging from modern image locos and rolling stock to steam era locos and rolling stock. Their major markets in this department are HO gauge and the much larger Gauge 1, which is where their contributions to Thomas come into play. Various Märklin locomotives would be used to construct the engine's chassis, with some other components such as funnels, buffers, brake pipes and buffer beams also being stripped from them for the characters. The main engines they would use for the chassis include the 5713 BR55080 to create the chassis for Thomas, Edward, James, Duck, Donald and Douglas, as well as providing various buffer beams for various characters, and the 5706 BR78464T, used for the bigger engines like Gordon, Henry and Oliver, with the latter's side rods coming from the V2 variant of the loco. As for other components, they would be sourced from the tender of the 5799 BR38, specifically for the buffer beams and Percy's toolbox, which are actually just the underframe equipment on the loco's tender. For Diesel, his buffer beams and stepladders were sourced from the 5719 DHG 500 shunter, and one of Boko's bogies would be sourced from the 5720 shunter number 25. Now, before you all come and berate me in the comments, no, I didn't forget. I was specifically saving this engine for its own section, and that engine indeed is the famous 5700 BR80 060 tank engine. Not only did this engine provide chassis, buffer beams, buffers, Diesel's toolboxes, Toby's bell and City of Truro's smokebox door, but it was also used much more regularly on set. During the first series, because of the limited amount of characters at this time, an engine would be required to haul a short line of trucks to create some background action for various scenes. The BR80 was employed for these tasks. Every time you would see some random trucks moving in the background of Series 1, the BR80 was responsible for hauling them. The loco even sneakily made its way into being actually seen on screen. In these promotional photographs, the engine can just be seen behind Henry here, and in the episodes The Flying Kipper and Off the Rails, the engine can be seen passing the camera in the night shots. Do you see these little lights passing by? Well friends, that was the BR80 scurrying past like it was nothing. As production of the series moved on, more new characters would be introduced, meaning the BR-80 would be retired from its duties of rolling stock haulage. It was eventually repurposed as scrap set dressing, being broken up and weathered for scrapyard sets. The BR-80 wasn't entirely forgotten though, as before the engine would be remade into scrap, Thomas's sister series, Tugs, came along, and another BR-80 would be used in the show to represent the character Puffer, albeit with extensive modifications and new parts to resemble a prototypical American locomotive. And somehow, just somehow, the engine had a full CG render created and was seen at the Diesel Works in the 2012 special Blue Mountain Mystery. How this happened I will just never know. This is just absolutely mind-blowing. And finishing off the Märklin section is a piece of rolling stock that I think is also a Märklin product, and it is these OBB box cars. I couldn't find the product code for these, sadly. These made some small appearances in both Tugs and Series 5 of Thomas, and their bogies were later stripped for use with the Jet Engine in the Series 6 episode Thomas the Jet Engine, and the Rock Crusher for the Series 7 episode Bill, Ben and Fergus. And that's all regarding Märklin's contributions to the show. By the time Series 4 rolled around, most of the engines were now being completely custom machined from brass, chassis and all, with no components coming from any manufacturers. However, there was indeed one exception. This is where the small-scale, narrow-gauge engines come into play. They too had their bodies custom machined from brass, although their wheels, couplings and buffers were sourced from Derbyshire-based model railway component manufacturer Slater's Plastikard. For all of the narrow-gauge steam locomotives, they would all use the Slater's 7837MW Wantage Tramway Manning Wardle 10-spoke wheels, while for Rusty, the little diesel would use the SM32 unspoked Quarry Hunslet wheels. For the engine's buffers, the narrow gauge engines would all use the Slater's 7906 Great Western brass buffers, while their buffer housings were sourced from the 7909 L&ER brass buffers. And the coupling hooks they used were the 71553 link wagon couplings. For the goods wagons, the wheels they used were the Slater's 1612 HUD Hudson Skip 4-hole wagon wheels, while the coaches would use the 7130 AU split spoke wagon wheels. And that's all regarding Slater's Plastikard. So now it's time to move on to the final segment. We'll finish by covering some other manufacturers that have provided a small number of components for the show. Staying on the topic of narrow gauge, for the general goods trucks, not the slate trucks mind you, their body shells would be crafted from a Cooper Craft kit, specifically the 3016 match truck kit with some extensive modifications, while for the narrow gauge engines, their side rods would be sourced from old locomotives produced by Triang, specifically Loco R50 Princess Victoria. The trouble was that these rods did not fit well, and resulted in some of the most problematic slapped together valve gear ever seen in railway modelling, let alone in Thomas. As for standard gauge stuff, there isn't too much to cover in this section. While there's no official confirmation that this is the case, it's very likely Tidmouth Roundhouse's design was heavily inspired by a similar looking HO gauge roundhouse, specifically the 45758 roundhouse by German model manufacturer Vollmer. The anonymous old coaches that were seen throughout Series 1 were custom built from a kit from model manufacturer Milbro. As with the OBB boxcars, I sadly couldn't find the product code for these. However, I could find the codes for the specific parts used to make them, which can be seen in this leaflet. And to conclude this video, we'll cover a certain manufacturer that I'm sure a lot of you weren't expecting to see in this video. Yes, LEGO did indeed provide components for Thomas. In Thomas's Christmas party, the Fat Controller's podium in the episode is literally just a LEGO triangle, specifically made from the 3001 2x4 brick, the 3002 2x3 brick, and the 3003 2x2 brick. When creating Terence's snowplow, another LEGO piece would be used, and that was this air tank that came in various LEGO space sets throughout the 1980s. Finally, in the 10th series episode Toby's New Shed, there's this wire coil which apparently is also LEGO related, according to the wiki at least, but I couldn't find any info on what this came from. And that's all we have for LEGO's usage in Thomas. So those, ladies and gentlemen, were the various modelling companies who provided key parts in the production of Thomas. Before I end this video, I would like to give a very big shout out to user Kudak888. His website, sodorscratchbuilding.com, contains a page showcasing all of Tenmille's products in their 1987 catalogue, which was a massive help in terms of finding the product codes for the thousands of Tenmille products I went over in this video. He's also just a very skilled modeller as well. I'll leave a link to his website in the description if anyone's interested. Now remember, if you have any ideas for TomTalks topics, don't hesitate to tell me down below in the comments. Anyways, that's all for tonight. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in my video on the Bassingbourn Model Railway exhibition next to come.